Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. I'm your host Paul, I'm an alcoholic. Today is Sunday, April 20th, 2025, and this is episode 25. I can't believe it's been 25 episodes. Tonight we got a special guest coming from Nashville, Tennessee. We got Aaron H. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm doing pretty good. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good, man. I appreciate you joining us, man. I was just thinking back about how you were on the first episode with us, and that was back in December 16th of last year.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that long ago, man. It really doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm happy to be back, man. I had such a good time, back in December, and I've listened to a lot of what you're doing since then, and it's just I love all of it. So yeah, thank you for having me, man, for real.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. I've had a lot of cool people reach out, people around the area, as well, that I live in the Nashville area. And so we know some of the same people, and everyone always brings up the episode when they see me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we for those that are listening, me and Aaron are going to be doing a 2-part series this Sunday tonight, and then next Sunday we will continue this. It's called From Self-Centered to God-Centered. It's a two-part episode where Aaron's just going to share his experience through the 12 steps, and so would appreciate everyone that's giving us all the feedback. And for those that are listening, we have an email address. We love getting comments or just people asking questions or sending talks in. Our email address is recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. And you can also find our the channel. You can find us on YouTube, and you can also find us on major platforms like Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, several other ones. So. Yeah, how was your Easter today, Aaron? How's it going?
Oh, it was good, man. It was good. We've got one more kid since last Easter. Now we got 4 of them.
Nice.
And it's always fun. The more the merrier. And the kids, they're 6, 4, 2, and newborn. So
wow.
I only say that to they're getting into the Easter egg hunt. Like we had a hunt today, and they were all jazzed up about it. And my wife, actually, it was meant to be a surprise for me too, but I found the box when Amazon delivered it, but she got like an Easter bunny costume.
Nice.
It was gonna surprise everybody, but I knew about it. So, but she just, when everyone was hunting for eggs, she popped out as the Easter bunny and the kids. I wish I had a video.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but it was good, man. What about you? What'd y'all get into?
Me and my wife and my son and his girlfriend went to my sponsor's house and ate dinner. Yeah, we hung out with a bunch of several of our friends in recovery, and we try to stay involved and stay connected with the recovery family. All my actual family lives in Chattanooga, and I wasn't able to go down there this year, but my recovery family's here, and we had a good time though. Yeah.
Okay.
So your kids are at the fun age then.
Yeah, they really are. Like, there's, what I mean? When kids are, 2, 3, there's only so much they understand, but when they start getting 4, 5, 6, it's you can really have a good time with them. And it's funny. I saw I was actually watching The Simpsons the other night. Everyone talks about like having kids. It's fun to do like stuff, like teaching them to ride a bike or going to Disneyland or whatever it is. But on The Simpsons, there's this kind of funny, kind of quirky character. It's comic book guy, and he's just kind of very cynical, and but he had a girlfriend that wanted kids, and he was like, no, I don't want kids. And they were at a drive-in movie, or like a whatever. And anyway, and Bart and Lisa were watching the movie, and I think it was like Back to the Future, and Bart and Lisa got super excited about it, and the comic book guy is watching their reaction, and he starts tearing up, and he's like, this feeling, he's like, I don't know what it is. And the girl looked at him, and she's like, because you're experiencing this again through the eyes of a child. And I was like, that's what it is. Like, but but anyway, yeah, kind of neither here nor there, but I thought that was really cool, and that's what you get to do, So, but that's what it was like today. So I had a good time.
Wow, that's cool, man. Really, that's special. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, man. So, yeah, I'm super excited about this because when we the first time, it was our first episode, and I was like, I wasn't, to be honest with you, I was kind of nervous. Things have changed on the podcast. I've gotten a little bit more open and comfortable with doing interviews and stuff, and we've had a lot of cool people and a lot of cool experiences. So I'm super excited to have you back on. So, I felt like the first time I was probably kind of pushy or whatever. It was just I was nervous, and even though I enjoyed it, I did enjoy it though.
Yeah. No, you came across very, very nice for what it's worth. You know what I mean? But
appreciate you.
I do know what you mean though. It's what I'm saying, a little intimidating. I still get weird talking in front of people. A lot of people they'll hear me talking. They're like, you don't seem like I'm like you don't see what's going on inside.
Yeah. And the cool part about this is like it's just a conversation. Like some of the best times I do on this is like, me and KDP we started going through the book together several months back, and like it's cool because we're just like literally just like shooting the crap, just like having a conversation like what we're doing right now. It's just cool. There's no stress, no pressure. We just have a good time, and people either listen to it or they don't.
Yeah, no, you're right about that, man. It's a good point. It's just very, very free flow. So I like it.
All right, man. Well, let's get rolling with it. So let's talk a little bit about, what did you attempt sobriety before you came in and stayed this time? I think there was a handful of times you'd come in and out, right? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. It's, a whole bunch, I was first off, when I first started drinking, it was like instant alcoholism, like the very first night I drank, I blacked out, the whole 9 yards. There was never a social drink in me, to be had. There wasn't. And I started getting in trouble really quickly, and, I got sent to treatment by my family for the first time at 16, and then again at 17, and then, started as soon as I turned 18, it's just a bunch of, legal trouble, jail, everything like that. And always rehab speckled in there, whether me crawling into like a mission type of deal or, a few years going by and my parents decided they wanted to send me to like a, paid place again or court ordered or whatever. But I was, like it's to the point where if I told somebody how many silver chips I picked up or how many times I tried to get sober, like they might not call me out on it, but they probably wouldn't believe me. Like if I told them, they'd probably be like, oh, yeah, it takes what it takes, but they probably wouldn't believe it. So, but just, I can't, so many attempts, and a lot of genuine ones, and it never stuck. And, one thing, it's funny, I know we want to talk about, going through the steps, but I swear to God, this, I was in a meeting right before I got sober this time, and a guy, Scott L. from Nashville, he was reading the How It Works. And he said, he got to the part, he goes, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. And he stopped, which, it's unconventional to stop during How It Works or ad lib. But he goes, the steps are not part of the program. He goes, the steps are the program. No steps, no program. And I'll never, and I just remember, it stuck out to me, A, because I'd never thought about it before, but B, because you don't interrupt How It Works, And, and when I was getting sober this last time, I went to jail again, of course, and I'm sitting in there and it's, I told the story, if somebody knows me, they've heard it a million times, but the kind of non-theatrical version is, I was calling everyone to kind of say my goodbyes, like the people close to me, I was calling them to kind of thank them for being there for me and, and all this. And I wasn't trying to, lead on that it was going to be the last time I talked to him, but I just wanted to reach out to him. And my sponsor, he goes, why don't you come back to, the program? And I said, bro, it's not going to work for me. He goes, how do you know? I was like, do you know how many times I've tried this? How many rehabs, how many, all the consequences? And he goes, "Have you ever worked all 12 steps?" And I remember I was like, of course. I was like, I've been in rehab, all this, all the workbooks. And he goes, "That's great." He goes, "That's not what I asked you though." He goes, "Have you ever worked all 12 steps out of the book, every single word, all of it, as if your life depended on it, withholding nothing, with another man who's done it before, all 12 of them?" And I just stopped. I never thought. I was like, "Oh, gee." I was like, "Well, actually," I was like, "I never really," but, and he just cut me off. He goes, "I guarantee if you do that, you'll be sober." And I can't remember a time somebody said something to me with more sort of nonchalant conviction. Like he wasn't trying to convince me. He didn't care if I believed it. Like it'd be like if I looked up, and said, "Hey, that's the sky up there." Like if someone tried to argue with me about that, like I wouldn't spend too much time bickering. I'd just be like, "It's the sky," but that's how he said it to me. And I believed it. And that's really what, started me on the, the journey to do what I'm doing now. So,
yeah. And what's your sobriety date?
March 29th, 2016. So just got
nice.
9 a few weeks ago.
Nice. Congratulations, dude. 2016. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. It was but that was a wild year, man. I had when I in all the attempts to get sober, I'd made it close to 6 months twice. And in 2014, I was in jail for about 3 days right after New Year's. And when I got out, somehow I didn't drink, and I got introduced. I started really taking this seriously, and I got a year and a half, and I ended up blowing that. It's long, you know how it goes, but I relapsed, and I thought I'd like blown my only chance, So there was like that happened August of 2015, and so from August of 15 to March of 16. Just a lot of hospitals, a lot of people weren't even 12-stepping me anymore. Like I'd call people and they would call mobile crisis and just send the ambulance. Excuse me. And the people at the hospital near me, they just knew me by name. I'll tell you this now. I'll get into the steps, but I was getting wheeled in the hospital one time on a gurney, just looking horrible. I hadn't bathed in, at least a week, maybe 2 or 3. You know the drill.
Yeah.
And this nurse waves at me, like kind of excited to see me. And I'm like, what the, what's that about? And then when I go in the room, the charge nurse is kind of asked me all the standard, like history of high blood pressure or whatever she was asking me. And I was like, "Yo, can I get a sandwich or some crackers or anything?" And she slammed the clipboard down on her leg. And she was like, "We're not a bed and breakfast. Like, this isn't a hotel. You don't just come in here now." And I said, whoa. I said, did I do something to offend you? And it turns out it was my 4th time in that hospital in 21 days, and wow. I had no recollection of the previous 3.
Wow.
Because they would take me in a blackout, and if you're not going to die, they give you fluids and they put you in a cab and send you home. So, but it was bad. But yeah, man, it's this time when I came around, like I said, my sponsor confronted me with that, and I said, I'm going to give this a shot. I really am, and we started working the steps, and we started reading at the front cover of the book, like not page 1 or Roman numeral 1, just the cover. And I remember he said to me, he goes, I said, "This is silly," and I don't even think I said that, but he probably could tell and he goes, "We want to have the attitude that we know nothing about this, and the attitude that we want every single piece of information we can get, whether the copyright info you need everything. If you think you have anything, you're in trouble. You need to start from I know nothing."
That's awesome.
Yeah, and not in a condescending way, not like, shut up, you're stupid. None of that. Just kind of like, hey, like, you're if you're deathly ill or getting a horrible car wreck, you're not going to be grilling the triage nurse like, why is the needle going in the left arm? You're just going to be like, "Please help me," and that's the attitude I tried to have. And I remember one of the most magical things, I had been in rehabs all up and down, the Eastern United States, or but let's say the Midwest. Well, that's probably more accurate. And in meetings everywhere, and talk to people, and I, for me personally, for my, type of affliction, I never really understood what the first step meant. That, we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives will become unmanageable. The way I read that for almost 2 decades was, I admitted I was powerless over alcohol once I started to drink. I thought, once I drink, horrible things happen. I know I'm going to jail. I know I'm getting fined. I know I'm getting blacked out. I know I'm doing horrible things. So I used to come into recovery just focusing all my energy on trying not to drink, whether it was, not hanging around old people or what, just willing it, just my willpower, my determination. And I always got drunk. And, I'm glad that we went through, every single word of the book. And, my sponsor pointed out all the times where it says, we were without defense against the first drink, like in Jim and Fred, thought they had it. It's just a matter of willpower, staying on guard, shortly after where he got drunk, it's, we heard no more of Fred for a while.
Yeah.
And, I love the part, in Bill's story, where it says, it's just all these short, poignant sentences. He goes, I woke up, period. Yeah. This had to be stopped, period. I saw I could not take so much as one drink, period. I was through forever. Before then, my wife, or I'd made lots of sweet promises. He goes, well, my wife happily observed I meant business this time. Like, his wife was probably his biggest skeptic. How many times has that woman heard it?
Yeah.
And even she could tell, like, he's on a different footing. And I never really read the book before. And when he got done with that paragraph, he looked at me, he goes, read the next sentence. And it goes, shortly afterward, I came home drunk, and he goes, he goes, you're, obviously when you take a drink, you're screwed. Everyone knows that. He goes, but you're powerless over alcohol's call to you.
Yeah.
He goes, that's the hopeless, helpless part for you. He goes, if that wasn't true, you just wouldn't drink. If somebody offered you a drink, like, no thanks. I'm pulling my life down. I don't drink anymore. He goes, it would be that simple.
Yeah.
But he goes, you're a type of guy that, can't stay away from alcohol no matter how great the necessity or wish. And a lot of people are probably listening to this and thinking like, yeah, well, no kidding, but I never knew that. And I it's like the opposite of step one for me, like and I mean in a very literal way, like the antithesis of step one for Aaron Ham is I can stay sober as long as I want to badly enough. Like that's the furthest thing from the truth possible. Yeah. The real, step one is that I'm unable to stay sober no matter how badly I want to or need to. Yeah. Now, and some people might disagree with that. There's a lot of, and I talk to people, it talks about it in the book, like if in working with others, like if he thinks he can quit on his own power, encourage him, he may, if he's not too alcoholic, and they talk about, sure, the hard drinker, sufficiently strong reason, the ill health, falling in love, warning of a doctor, judge puts you on paper, wife threatens to leave, neighbor puts his arm around you, he's a good buddy, talks some reason to you. These people can stop or moderate. So, a lot of people, I've run into people in AA that kind of disagree with that. And I can't say what's right for anyone or anyone else or but, people would tell me, they'd be like, man, you just need to make your mind up to not drink. Yeah. Or they say like, I don't care what happens, don't drink. And I swear, I've said this sarcastically a lot in my life and I'm ashamed of it. Like, I don't say it sarcastically anymore, but like, I haven't found that anywhere in the book. Yeah. And I haven't seen that work for a chronic alcoholic ever. Otherwise, what are your thoughts? Because it's funny, I'll tell you, that's almost a controversial point now. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, like if you share that in the wrong meeting, they'll, as long as you make excuses for yourself, you're not going to get better. So it's like, well, I'm literally just reading out of the book, bro. But what do you think about that?
No, I'm in the same boat. It's funny because when you mentioned that, powerless, once I started the drink, I know, like, and myself included, my first couple of years of sobriety, before I really understood what the book was talking about, and, I was in that school of thought for, a year or two. And then, I still know a lot of people that think the same thing. As long as I don't take the first drink. Well, that's not what the book's talking about. Not today when I read it. It says right there, and it says, unable to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force, the memories or suffering of like an humiliation of a week or a year ago or a month ago or whatever, right? It says that we were without defense against the first drink, right? And, but it's such a big piece that's of the puzzle that's definitely needs to be talked about, because if I think that all I got to do is just not put alcohol in my body, that's pretty. I mean, it tells us right there on, I think it's page, I forgot what page it is, but it talks about the main problem centers in the mind, because it says if I don't put alcohol in my body, we should be good, right? Well, how often did that work, right? It says, therefore, the main problem centers in the mind rather than the body, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm right there with you. I agree with you on that, yeah.
Well, I like that. My sponsor one time, he goes, you never took the first drink drunk.
Yeah.
Because I'd blame my drinking on my drinking. I'd be like, well, of course my life's a mess. Of course I can't get sober. I got all these. He goes, what happens the last time you were 3 months sober? On the day that you guys swore with tears in your eyes, you never do it again. And then, 94 days later, walk to the liquor store. What's that? What changed? I was like, I don't know. He goes, that's the hopeless, Matt. He goes, that always happens to you. Yeah. And
so true.
I love, there was and not to beat a dead horse or like get controversial, but I love what you do, where we can't bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation even a week or a month ago, or without defense against the first drink. Yeah. And people would tell me, they'd say, well, play your tape through. Well, the very next sentence is, if these thoughts occur, they're hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea, this time we'll handle ourselves like other people. I'll get an Uber this time. I won't hit nobody. I'm just going to get a pint. No leader. It's and then, people, they've also told me, they'll be like, well, when you want to drink, call your sponsor. Yeah. And, the end of more about the book's riddled with this. I mean, given a couple examples, almost tones, makes it sound like there's only one or two that you're reaching for. It's riddled with it. But it says, once more, meaning they've covered it several times. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. It says, and at such times, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. Like, Amen. I've called my sponsor with tears in my eyes, walking to the liquor store, and I still get drunk, and it's not, there's the debate about, the traditions. They came about, they're long, Bill came up with them, and they said he really kind of almost quit getting invited to like conferences because, he would harp on the traditions and no one wanted to hear that. They wanted to hear the Bill Wilson story and nothing else. Yeah. And so they shortened them, and, I think it's the third tradition. It's been a long day, but they go, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, and they shorten it down from our membership should include all those who suffer from alcoholism. And there's the debate, like there's a lot of people that want to quit drinking that really don't suffer from alcoholism. Yeah. And some say, well, that's good because they widen the doors, like more people came in because the bar's set, lower. But the other hand is, maybe some people come in that don't suffer from what we suffer from, just kind of don't drink, and then they meet a chronic person, and the chronic person says, I need help, and they go, oh, well, just call me every day, and hit the meeting next week, Sure. But the point is, the reason step one was so crucial for me, I wasn't going to do this stuff until I knew I was doomed to drink again if I didn't. I have to know, I have to accept, realize I have a problem before I accept the solution. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have, a rash on my body right now. If somebody came up to me and was like, hey, I got some really good rash cream for you, I'd be like, no thanks. I don't suffer from that, home. If somebody comes up and is like, you're going to drink again unless you make all these amends and do it, just could be like, how about I just don't drink, pimp? You know what I'm saying? Like, how about I just go home and don't make my two hands pick up alcohol? After all, I'm in control, right? Like, so it was like, I don't know, they call it like an epiphany or whatever you want to. It just hit me one day that, apart from some sort of divine help, I was going to drink again, and that really, that's what catapulted me into step two. And step two is an interesting thing because I always, they masterfully laid out in the 12 and 12 in step two, and I don't know that as well as I know the big book, but like the people that don't believe in God, the people that had religion and something bad happened to them and they turned away, in all the different scenarios. And my thing was, I always believed in God, like wholeheartedly, but I didn't think that he really came down and was like interactive in human lives. And like you can't wake up in the morning with a messy bed and like pray for your bed to make itself, like you just can't. And so my argument was, it's I believe in God, he's there, he watches, but you don't just pray for things, and he helps you. And there was two things. I'll go through these, and I'd love to get your take on this. But it's I was in either rehab or some sort of halfway house or sober living or jail or penitentiary. In, let's see, Twin Cities, Minnesota, Louisville, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, Danville, Kentucky, LaGrange, Kentucky, Owensboro, Kentucky, Nunnally, Tennessee, Burns, Tennessee, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, Hohenwald, Tennessee, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Atlanta, Georgia, all over the place.
Wow.
And literally every single one of those cities in every single one of those states, they'd either cart me to a meeting or somebody would come in the facility or the institution and they'd bring a meeting in. And they all had the same story, hopeless drunk, tons of problems, work these steps, God changed my life, whatever, God did and I'd be in, Hohenwald thinking, yeah, right, homie, you know what I'm saying? And then I'm up in Mississippi, you know what I'm saying? And somebody comes in and say, boy, I'll tell you, I was living on the street 4 years, and I got blah, blah, blah. I started doing this, my life, I've been employed for 11 years, what? And I'm like, yeah, okay, homie, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And it hit me, I swear to God, it hit me that either everywhere I went, like there was some underground sort of, society, like whose business it was to trick me. You know what I mean? Like they were getting these agents, like he's in Lexington this month, like get someone down there to pretend that, AA's real. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It was either that or they were all telling the truth and I just hadn't been doing what they were saying. Like there's not a third option in that scenario. It's one or the other. And, I swear to God, like if I go into a room, like a big conference where there's a lot of new people, a lot of old timers, a lot of, men, women, everything. And I said, everyone go to the left side of the room that believes in God, that tries to live how they believe God would want them to. They try to be good people. They work these steps, blah, blah. Y'all go to the left side of the room. And everyone who doesn't really believe in God and thinks religions kind of cause trouble or maybe a money scam or, what you got problems with it. You don't, and not interested in this stuff. Go to the right side of the room. If you divided a room like that, the two sides would be opposite. The left, you know what I'm saying? Like the first side would they'd have jobs and clean clothes and friends and, and the other side would be in detox and black eyes and it's just kind of which society?
So true.
I mean, do you feel me? You could just ask that question, And,
that's so funny.
But
it's true.
Yeah, but the other thing I love, in the We Agnostics, it's talking about oh man. Well, I love where it's talking about electricity and it's talking about the atoms and the electrons and all this in the steel girder. You've heard that.
Yeah.
And it's like, you take anyone that's been to fifth grade and they know that all, matter is made up of, atoms, you know what I'm saying? Or maybe seventh grade, hell, I don't know what it is. And I mean, a nickel is really, a bunch of atoms or, anything, a piece of wood, Most people that have been through 7th, 8th, 9th grade would bet on that. Even though they've never seen an electron microscope, you understand what I'm saying? They would bet that the stuff we're breathing is oxygen. I mean, most people know that. Yeah. But when you come to them, I'll say when somebody came to me and they're like, hey man, so all that material stuff, the atoms, all this, matter, whatever, that's awesome. Maybe even deeper than that. There's some other force or some intelligence or just some stream of light, maybe something deeper than that kind of guides affairs. And now I want to see the microscope. Now it's well, prove it to me, and I said that to a guy one time. I said, prove it to me. And I'll never forget this. He said, if you spend the next week of your life being horrible to people, he goes, now you don't have to break any laws or hit anybody, commit any crime. No. Just be rude to people. If you're at a meeting and they ask you to clean up, tell them to get screwed. Tell them you're not a janitor. Tell them to hire somebody. If you're, your mom texts you to check on you, tell her to quit bugging you. The woman at Starbucks turns the screen around and asks for a tip. Tell her that her job's really super easy and she doesn't deserve a tip, and raise your voice when you do it. And he goes, just be a prick to everybody. He goes, now for the next week, he goes, be as nice and kind and loving and generous, patient, giving, consider everything as you possibly can. Text your mom, tell her you love her, help clean up, stay late after the meeting. You get the point. Mm-hmm. He goes, at the end of that week period, those two lives are going to be drastically different. Oh, he goes, the first guy's going to be miserable, probably had some arguments, isn't getting too many calls of people wanting to hang out. Just, he's going to feel like, not even him, he's going to feel like the world is a lonely, cold, dark, unwelcoming place. Yeah. He goes, and guy number two, it's the opposite. He's going to feel happy, self-esteem. People are going to want to be around him, all this and that. He goes, do you agree with that? I said, yeah, I agree with that. He goes, what's that force separating those two lives? He goes, one doesn't have more education than the other. One doesn't have more money. There's nothing worldly different about them. He goes, their worlds are very different from one another, only based off what they're putting out into it. Wow. And I swear, and it's what I put out dictates how my life is arranged. Yeah. It's not motor oil. It's not cash. I mean, what is that? What is that? Yeah. And it's just as real as you and me talking to each other right now. Yeah. And it was just like, oh, damn. He goes, that's what we're trying to tap into. He goes, so until you can have this spiritual awakening through these steps, if that's real, I'm not telling you it's real, if that's real, he goes, why don't you spend the meantime being as nice and generous and patient and loving to everyone you possibly can? And that was my belief. That's how step 2 started for me. You know what I'm saying? What about you, man? I'm dying to hear that, because you seem like I was just telling my wife today, I was like, he's such a kind man. Like, you're a big dude, you don't look like a chump. Like, you look like you could be scary, but you're like, and I mean this with all due respect, like, you're like a sweet person, and you don't have to be. Like, thank you. And I just, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, it's I appreciate that, man. It's cool. I love like the concept I had of God when I got here was, I thought it was, I didn't realize, it was like, okay, so what, you die and you're gonna go meet some guy supposedly, and like he's gonna be like, dude, come on now, what are you even here for? You know what I mean? Come on. That's just the stuff I'd been doing for years,
Yeah.
And it was, I really like how you said, like, the energy you put out is what you get back. And I didn't understand that for a long time, until like my first sponsor was real good at like shining a different light on situations, and I was able to start looking at different situations from a different point of view. And anyways, I didn't know that there was a power, like now when I'm talking about it, it's completely different than when I first got sober. When I first got sober, I really just didn't think God cared anything about me, right? The concepts I had of God was like, hey, this dude don't mess with people like me. I remember like, when I first got sober, there was some stuff I really didn't have any business doing, but I didn't know how not to, because that was just what I'd been doing for years. I'm not going to go into details, but my sponsor, I remember the first time he had asked me, he said, so have you asked God for help? I'm sitting there like, no, I haven't asked God for help. Like, why would I do that? People had been telling me my whole life, God, give it to God or do this, he'll take care of you and all this. And for me, that just wasn't my experience, right? And not only was it, I didn't think God cared about me, but also, I just didn't think he didn't want to mess with people like me, with the life I'd been living. I was raised, Southern Baptist, and, I'm not saying this is what they told me, but this is what I heard when I was there, okay? So it was like, the better you do, the more God loves you. And if you repent and stop doing all that stuff, and you give your life to this and this, you'll go to heaven. And if you don't repent and you keep doing all that stuff, you're going to burn in hell for the rest of your life. That's what I heard. Mm-hmm. Right? And I was like, oh man, I ain't messing with that guy. You know what I mean? Like, he don't want to have anything to do with me. So I was at a men's retreat about 2 or 3 years ago. You was talking about Scott L. I think it's probably the same guy in Nashville. That's my grand sponsor, if it's the same guy. But me, him, and my sponsor, John, were at a men's retreat in Oklahoma. They were leading the retreat, and my sponsor, he said, I thought I had a cool 4-step experience, but I just revisited and I realized that I had a really, really profound experience with the second step, And he was like, these new conceptions of God. And if that was the game changer for me with Alcoholics Anonymous was if I'd come in and I had to have the same conceptions that, that I thought the church had taught me all those years, or if I had to have the same conception that like even my sponsor had in the beginning, because I just didn't have the same conception as him in the beginning, right? Then I don't know that I would have stuck around, Or if, like the second people started talking about going to hell if you didn't doing right, oh man, I'm running for the hills. You know what I mean?
Right.
So when I'd hear stuff like that, it was just a turnoff for me. But so the game changer for the second step for me was like, hey, look, we're going to, however inadequate it was enough to make the approach, right? We're going to choose our own conception of God, however inadequate it was enough to make the approach. And I think some people get turned off when I hear that because I'll talk about, I'll share some of my conceptions, my current conceptions of God. And I think people are like, well, you can't, create God. That's, that's blasphemy or whatever. But that's not really what the process looked like for me. It was a matter of like, we're not creating a God. I mean, God's all powerful. But what we're doing through the process is that we're going to discover that we have all these old conceptions of God that just aren't true, right? Like, he's not up there keeping score on Paul. He's head over heels in love with me today, right? He loves me in spite of me, right? There's nothing I can do to change that love. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
And like when I started seeing and experiencing that love, it was a game changer for me. And that it wasn't, that took a while for me to really start seeing it. But I did experience it through like the acceptance my sponsor had for me in the beginning. I could share certain things with him. And like, he just loved me no matter what. I could start accepting that, or I felt that acceptance and it was a game changer for me. It was like, wow, like, I trust this guy, he loves me and he means well, he's trying to help me and he is helping me, and it was one of those situations where it was like, well, I wasn't able to change, so, it's not like God loves me so I can change. Or God loves me, if I change. It was a matter of like God's loving me so I can change. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was a game changer. The fact that I could just have my own, I could choose my own conception, and like, he was loving. He wasn't up there keeping score with me. Like Scott always talks about, creative. He comes up with clever little ways to get me out of the holes I dig myself. You know what I mean? And that's a powerful, for lack of a better word, being out there that I'm willing to trust. It's like, wow, he'll have me go through certain situations to have me learn whatever it is he's wanting me to learn, right? And that's something that's big enough for me to start trusting over time, and also, so I mean, that's the main thing. The game changer was I got to choose my own conception of God. It didn't have to be anyone's but mine. It had to make sense to me, right? Yeah. Can you relate to any of that?
Oh, I do, man. I know what you mean about like, God wouldn't want anything to do with me. Like I had too much catching up to do. Like there was people that had been good, their whole lives that, he's focusing on them. But I remember my sponsor said to me, he used names, but just because the names are super controversial, I won't do that. But he basically said, think of the worst person throughout history, like in the history books or someone today, just the most despicable person on earth.
Yeah.
I said, okay, and he told me who he thought it was. And then he goes, now think of the very best person, either that's alive now or is ever lived. I said, yeah. He goes, I believe God loves them both the exact same. Amen. And talk about like the vast, it'd be like my kids. I love if one gets an A on a paper and one gets a C, like technically the first one did better, but I genuinely don't love the second one any less. Like my love from them is like beyond like, what they can or can't do, and I'll never forget that. And it's funny, there's this guy, I think it was Bob D. He was talking about this woman he was friends with. And he goes, and in this, I'm glad this is kind of like a non, like, I don't know, I'm not an English major, but like a secular, it's not affiliated with anything, so I can kind of speak a little more openly than I would in a meeting. But
absolutely.
He said he knew this woman that was like a linguistic, whatever the pathologist or whatever the hell it is, somebody that just studies, words their whole life, languages, all this stuff. and he was talking about all the translations the Bible went through. And I mean, from, whatever, and this may be out of order, like, if I'm wrong, forgive me. It's not meant to be a quote, but, like, Greek, Roman, Hebrew, all these different translations. He goes, and according to the linguistic, professional, he goes, the commandments, they didn't start out as a thou shalt not, or, thou shalt. He goes, they were written, it wasn't directives. They were written more as cause and effect. Like, don't do this or you're going to feel horrible. Don't do, and the whole, like, we're not punished for our sins. We're punished by them.
Yeah.
Like, if I was living dirty and, like, robbing people or something like that, and then bad things happen, it's not God punishing me. It's just, like, they got my fingerprints, like they found the knife, like, I'm,
you're
and,
guilty.
yeah. And it made it like, it wasn't like, but there was this meme I shared, and I'm not even saying I stand by this. It was just funny, but it was a thing. It said, a lot of people swear they're fighting demons when really they're just fighting the consequences of their actions and decisions. And it was kind of, it's not meant to, I didn't blow it up and hang it on my wall. It's not, I don't pray to it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's a lot of it wasn't God to begin. He was just up there just kind of, it's like if my kid takes his diaper off and like makes a mess before I can get to him, like I'm not Googling adoption agencies to give him up. I'm just kind of like, Jesus, bro, where are the wipes? So like, again, like really, and it's that's kind of the attitude. I don't know. I believe, and I believe that's kind of how God looks at me. So no, but I love that, man. I love that.
That's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's once I kind of got that, when I had probably done 3 or 4 like 5th steps where I was honest before I got sober this time, just over my, where you tell them everything. I probably didn't write them right, and I didn't continue with the program, but I told them everything, all the stuff you're not going to tell. I went in on it, trying to do it right. And you go home and it tells you to you start reading. It says we reviewed the first 5 proposals, and it asks you basically 5 different times for the 5 steps. Like if you've if we made mortar without sand, have we tried skimped on the cement, put in the foundation, like have we and then there's 5 question marks, or one's a question within a anyway. The point is, and I always got hung up on step 3. Like, like to my back in my, wherever I was at the halfway house, I'd be like, have I really made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand it? Because, I'd smoke cigarettes. I'd look at stuff on the internet I probably shouldn't. I gamble, the whole, how it goes.
Yeah.
And I asked a guy one time, I said, I don't feel like I'm doing the 3rd step right. Like anytime I've tried to get sober, and it's kind of short but sweet, but I love it. He said, excuse me, he goes, the best, like the most closest to perfect 3rd step anyone on earth can do is an absolute readiness and willingness to go through with the remaining 12 steps, 4 through 12. He goes, that's what removes the garbage in us and helps align our will with God's. He goes, you're just making a decision to do that. And it's funny, Sandy Beach, he goes, I remember he said one time, and I heard this in the last year or 2. He goes, step 3 is like making a decision to go to college. I want a degree. Like, let's do it. He goes, you still got to enroll, buy the books, attend class, study, and I love that. And that, he goes, are you willing to do this? We're not asking that you put down cigarettes and don't say another swear word ever. It's just, are you willing to do this?
Yeah.
And that really cleared, I swear to God, that cleared things up for me. And, you hear all the time, they'll say, what's the most important word in step 3? And it's care, to the care of, not to the punishment of or the dictation of, and one thing I'll cut it with this, but, my sponsor had me do an exercise, and to my knowledge, it's not in the literature anyway. I mean, it correlates, it's parallel kind of with the, the idea, the goal, but it's not in the literature. But I said, there's certain things I'm afraid to turn over to God. And he says, what are they? And I said, well, my reputation, my sex life, and my money. And he goes, okay. He goes, write those down, column for, straight down. I said, okay. And then he goes, column 2, he goes, What's your fear behind, letting these go? And Colin to us said, well, God might have me celibate, or, he might not have me, he might have people, think poorly of me, remember, bad reputation, think I'm a nerd, or I've gone soft or whatever. And then, money might have me broke. He goes, okay. He goes, that's cool. He goes, the third thing is, he goes, how do all these areas look right now with you running them? And bro, I had no friends. I was 30. I'd never been invited to a wedding. Like most people go to a wedding, people never been invited to a wedding, didn't, just no social events, no calendar, no. And he goes, what about your sex life? I said, well, I have a bad reputation in that area. It's just, I've never really had a meaningful relationship. There's no give and take. It's just, it's empty. He goes, okay. He goes, what about money? How you doing there? I said, well, I'm flat broke. I'm busted. I'm broke. Don't have shit. And he goes, okay. He goes, now last one. He goes, to preface this, I want you to pretend, whether you believe it or not, just pretend that this God, like you say, is crazy about you, wants nothing but the best for you. He's all powerful. You know what I'm saying? He's not limited by time or anything. You can do whatever he wants. How do you think he would work out these areas if you gave him absolutely, free, utter control? I said, well, he'd probably have me have some friends, and have me be a good friend, this and that. And he goes, he'd probably lead me in the direction of a meaningful relationship, where I could feel secure and, and have a family and all this. And he goes, with money, I said, with money, he'd probably have me at least be, have a stable living, not be on the streets, have, housing and a car vehicles. And, I'm happy to tell you, since I started trying to live that way, all those areas blossomed just like so. I used to, I had nothing when I came to recovery. And, I had no money, I had no none. So I'd go to meetings and I felt very intimidated. Everyone had their lives together. It's like you're being the freshman, you know what I'm saying? And you're in a class with the senior varsity football players. Like you just feel so less than. Yeah. And so I'd wear wife beaters and like show my tattoos, and I'd like braid my dreads and I'd try to look intimidating as best I could. And no one liked me. And I remember Sam, he goes, go to this meeting. He goes, be nice to people, smile at people, shake hands, clean up the coffee. I was like, then they're really gonna, my only card is that I'm a little more rough around the edges than them. I said, you want me to sacrifice that? He goes, yeah, do it, see what happens. And I started being nice to people. Within like a month, they asked me to be one of the lead shares. Like they're inviting me to sushi, you understand? Yeah. And I'm not going to run through every one, but same thing. He goes, how do you treat money? I said, I get mine. I don't give you $1. Like, are you you lost your mind? Like it's mine. I'm stingy. It's mine. And he goes, be generous, try to help people, work overtime, in every area that I do the opposite of what I think's best, like it blossoms. But anyway, that was all kind of step 3 in a very long roundabout way.
I love that. Yeah. Speaking of, how old was you when you got sober in 2016? How old was you?
Well, hell, that was, I was 31, getting ready to turn 32.
31.
So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
How about you?
I was 33. Yeah. And my sobriety date is the December 17th of 2016. So, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Class of 16.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good stuff, man. Yeah. I like that. For me, it took me a while. My third step experience was way different today than what it was when I first got sober. I really like in the book how it's saying today I kind of I focus on like self and all the different ways it shows up. And from 60 to 63, how like this, the big book asks you the same 2 questions over and over again, right? Oh, it's at page 44, right? And it's when you want to, can you quit drinking? Or when you do drink, do you have any control over the amount, right? And then it goes into we agnostics. This is just my take on it. But then for the second step, and then when it gets to how it works, right there around page 60, it takes that hard right turn and it talks like, oh, by the way, guess what? That's not really the issue. You know what I mean? The problem is that you're selfish, self-centered, and self-seeking. If you don't start living on a spiritual basis, you're doomed. You know what I mean? It's like, So what we try to do is like, whenever I'm working with a guy today, it's like I really emphasize on like, to go into that, the actor trying to run the whole show, always in collision with people, even though your motives are well, and it's funny because I usually work with a lot of guys in different recovery houses, and it's not hard for any of them to realize, they're always in collision with everybody, Don't get me wrong. You don't have to be in a recovery house for that. You can just be in self and do that. Period. But I always kind of emphasize. I have them turn those couple pages into questions. Am I in collision with people even though my motives are good? Am I the actor trying to run the whole show? Am I a producer of confusion rather than harmony? And because it says, we're at step 3, being convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success. It's like, am I convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success? And I wasn't for a long time, and I'm still not always today. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not always conscious of it. It's like, at the end of the day, I don't know any alcoholics that have given every part of their life always 100% to the care of God. And we're not always conscious of it, but so what I try to emphasize a lot when we're doing the step work now is that it's like, we're doomed, right? If I'm living life on self, and me and Chris S. were going through that. We did a series on the podcast. It was called An Adequate Presentation for Through the Steps, a Guide for Sponsorship. And he made a comment on there that's huge. And he was like, we're not recovering from alcohol, like, not the drinking and drugs. It's like it's the self and all the different ways that it shows up, right? It's like, all right, I don't like how this is happening, or I get to work and don't think, things at work are treating, people at work aren't treating me right, or my job ain't treating, or whatever it is, I'm just using that as an example, but like self shows up all the time, and I like Charlie Pease always talking about, which was a game changer for me. He would say the whole thing centers around the self piece, and he used it like as a hub, like an airport hub, and like, you see, like, an airport hub, like all these different flights are leaving that hub. And he's saying it's the same thing with like self and all the different ways it shows up, Yeah. And that's the big game changer for me. But I love, I'm right there on board with you when it's like, technically it's making a decision to go through with the rest of the steps, right? And, which leads us right into the fourth step. It says a business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke, right?
Yeah.
And I like how when I'm sitting down with a guy, because I tell you my experience with step 4 and 5, I didn't the first handful of times, I'd say the first 3 or 4 years I was sober, I didn't understand like the intent behind the actual 4th step, but if you look at that, between 3 and 4, it says, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it had a little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us, right? So like when I'm working with a guy today, I'm always emphasizing on like the reason we're doing this is because we're going to get down to causes and conditions, right? And we're going to find out, what's blocking us, But the first 2 or 3 times I did an inventory, I didn't understand. I was just like writing stuff and I had no clue why I was doing it. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So what's your experience with that?
Well, exactly what you just said at the end. It's. I thought. I mean, it was almost like a mindless. How like when you, if you used to get in trouble in school, they made you write. I will not talk during class 100 times. Like it was just kind of. I mean, almost. That was the part. You just mindlessly would write it.
Yeah.
And that's how I used to do it. My sponsor and through just some good mentors, this time going through it, it's multifaceted. For one, a few big resentments were, an ex-girlfriend, and let's just say the police, and, the ex-girlfriend, the cause was, she cheated on me, lied to me, was, not a great person. What it affects is, pride, self-esteem, sex relations, all this, how it goes.
Yeah.
And then he goes, I remember we get to the 4th column. He goes, what'd you do wrong? I said, well, I talked badly to her. I cheated on her. I got into it with her dad, really kind of made her feel, like a piece of crap. And I remember he circled the 4th column and he goes, maybe if you hadn't done this stuff, he goes, and then he drew a line to the 2nd column. He goes, maybe she wouldn't have been over here doing this. And and I remember thinking, I even said to him, I was like, well, I think maybe she would have. She wasn't really that great of a person. And he goes, oh, okay. He goes,
Yeah.
so where'd you meet her? Like a library? I said, well, no. And he goes, what? Like, were you on like the choir together? I said, no. He goes, where'd you meet? I said, well, down at a bar. And he goes, did you look at her and think she would be a good mother or like a trustworthy companion? And I said, no, absolutely not. I said, she looked like a good time.
Yeah.
And he goes, so it sounds like selfishness, self-centeredness got you into that relationship. Oh, okay, fair enough. And then the cops, I'm resentful of them. They beat me up. They always trump up charges. They, not nice to you. Affects everything. The pride, self-esteem, security. And he goes, he asked me, he goes, were you ever framed? And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, were you ever completely innocent, no drugs, not under the influence, valid driver's license, not on probation, and a cop just walked up swinging a billy club, twirling it, and like dropped a bag of cocaine and said, well, Mr. Ham, look what we have. I said, no, that never happened.
Yeah.
He goes, so you were always breaking the law? I said, yeah. And so he circled column 4. He goes, if you weren't doing this over here, he goes, and he drew to column 2. He goes, it'd be a moot point. They wouldn't be over here doing this. And I never thought about it, that everything I had, Sandy Beach also, he goes, there's one problem that encompasses all problems, and there's one solution that encompasses all solution, and the one problem is apartness from God, and the one solution is in being in concert with God. And what happens is when I'm not getting what I want or something feels threatened or off or anything like that, I act outside of God's will.
Yeah.
And that either sends consequences coming my way, or even say somebody does something to me first, I react out of God's will. So the 4-step was just a series of that. A lot of times if I hadn't stirred the pot or done what I did, they wouldn't be over here doing. Even though, when I was younger, my dad had this girlfriend, him and my mom were divorced. She always treated me like shit, and was in my dad's ear and all this. And I had to look at that. It's like, well, if you love somebody and they had a son like you, like terrorizing their life, like how would you feel toward? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah. But probably one of the most impactful things the step work has ever done for me. And you know how long the 4-step, it's pretty long in the book. It's pages and pages and pages, but it's even, can be longer working through it. But in the 4-step where I did the first 3 columns and we went through and we looked at, all the death threats. I think it's like 66. And my sponsor goes through all these, the death threats, and we try to look at it from an entirely different angle. He says, we saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? I never knew that, I never read, and he goes, we couldn't wish them away any more than we could alcohol. How could we escape? ? I never, I was just writing it down and reciting it to somebody. Yeah. And it says, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms or the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And my sponsor, if you imagine looking at a 4-column 4-step, some people do 5, we do 4. I don't think anyone's right or wrong. But the point is, he goes, if you have a resentment against the person, column 1, he goes, because you didn't like their symptoms. The symptoms are column 2. That's their symptoms of their sickness. He goes, or how they affected you. That's column 3. If I don't like the cops, that's why their symptoms. Maybe they're a little abusive when you're in cuffs. 3, it affects how it affects me is my pride, my self-esteem, all this stuff. And he goes, it'd be like if you said you didn't like the dentist. He goes, why don't you, that's column 1. I don't like the dentist. Why don't you like the dentist? Well, he uses the drill. Column 2. Why don't you like the drill? Column 3, because it hits a bare nerve. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got nothing against the dentist or the drill. If the dentist is standing in my front yard with the drill, I don't care. Yeah. I don't like when the nerves get hit. Well, anyway, the point is, but he goes,
so true.
But the likers, here was the biggest part though. This is what I was trying to, he goes, he had me, he goes, I want you to think of 2 or 3 of the worst things you ever did, and this, maybe somebody spit in their mom's face or stole their kids' Christmas gifts, like on Christmas Eve, they woke up, kicked the dog. I don't know, a bit, maybe looked at, your 8-year-old son and said, my life would be a lot better if you were never born. Just something despicable, horrible thing. The most horrible things I've ever done. He goes, I want you to think of two of them, the very two worst. I said, okay, I got them. And he goes, do you think that's an accurate description of who you are? I said, no. He goes, do you want God judging you solely on those two things? I said, no. He goes, what if everyone knew about those two things you did, the whole world, society, all your friends, and they judged you on that? I said, would that be fair? I said, no. And he goes, people, even though they can be mostly good people, are capable of doing some horrible things. He goes, all these people on your 4-step are just like you. He goes, they may overall be somewhat decent people. You're just judging them on the worst aspects of their character. And he goes, the two worst things you did, he goes, do you want to receive justice for those things or mercy for those things? You yourself, Aaron. I said, well, of course, mercy. I want to be let off the hook. And he goes, it's mercy for everybody or it's justice for everybody. He goes, and you're a part of everybody and you get to pick. If you're in the Scots lineage, I know you've heard that before.
Yeah.
But I never had. And he goes, it's like we all screwed up. And I'd look at God and be like, hey, man, I didn't mean that, but these dudes over here deserve to burn. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Absolutely.
And that just, like how a squeaky door in like an old mansion, they... it just kind of like cracked the door for me to look at this from a different, whatever, be able to pray for these people. And I prayed, I'm not going to recite, the sick man prayer. And then I like to pray on 552, and you pray those for the people. And it, like Scott says, it's like holding ice up into sunlight. Like eventually it melts. Like I keep praying for these people. And the resentment goes away. And I did that in between column 3 and 4. So by the time I got to column 4, I could, accurately tell my part, because until I get free of that, it's still somehow their fault. Yeah. But, it's, I don't know, it's, I had this one, and this is the last thing I'll say. This isn't even like a cool thing, but there was a couple of resentments. I was like, I don't know what I did in column 4. I don't know what my part was, or, my faults, or, don't say, whatever. And he goes, you want to call these people on speakerphone, and I'm going to tell him Aaron thinks he's perfect and he never did anything wrong at this job, or like, do you agree? What do you think? I said, oh, okay. I know what they would say. I know what I did. Yeah. In any way, but
that's awesome.
What about you? What are your thoughts, man?
I'm so glad that you touched on the story you just told on, because I remember you'd shared that at the home group the last time you were there. You did it was on resentment, and I loved how you go about that. It's cool. I actually use that. I listened to a 5th Step this morning, and I actually utilized what you had shared. I remember you'd shared something along the lines of what you're doing pretty much is judging this person based off like 1 or 2 actions, and it's like, you're judging their entire character based off that. And I'll tell you an interesting point too, is for me, when I really like how you touched on, how you're like, when I'm hurt or threatened, right? When I'm hurt or threatened, my instinctual drive, my instincts are, definitely generally not in God's will, right?
Right.
So I love taking that to a further, to just a step further in whenever I'm in a situation, whether it's with someone at work or my wife or whatever, I'm more understanding in a person. So for example, and I'm not going to get into details, but if me and my wife are having a disagreement about something, right? I understand what the stance looks like whenever you're hurt or threatened. When self shows up in your life like that, right? Because I've done enough inventory. I do enough inventory on a regular basis to where I see how my vision's not always the most clear when I'm hurt or threatened, right? Mm-hmm. And when I have that understanding, now I can take that into my relationship with my wife or whoever, and I realize okay, it's part of I take that into my ideals and my sex conduct ideals, and where it's to be more understanding, less understood, and that's part of my ideals. I go to the St. Francis prayer when I do my sex ideals, But yeah, I love how you touched on that, because it's true. It's I'm hurt, I'm threatened, and generally my character is going to get kind of whacked when that happens, right?
Yeah.
And and I love also how you touched on what's the 2 worst things, and I'll tell you, Katie P, when we went through the 4-step and on the podcast, she actually put a different light on it. She said, doesn't like how, what does it say? This is our course, though we did not like their symptoms, which was column 2, and the way these disturbed us, which is column 3. And she also added to that, and she was like, Before we do the fourth column, it says we're prepared to look at this from an entirely different angle, right? And she says that that's the column one, the person. How did the person in column one look at it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, wow,
Yeah.
that's eye opening, And it's,
Mm-hmm.
so if I'm prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle, like what you were saying, like, with the stepmother, like, wonder what it was like having a son like myself, and I look back on my relationship, like, there was certain things that was going on in my childhood. I was just a little hellion, right? I mean, I raised hell since I was a kid, and all the stuff that I'd put my family through or put my mom through, and then like when I'd come in and I had, I'm not going to go into detail, but I had resentments against people, and it was like, man, at the end of the day, like, look what I've been doing. And also, I've never considered these people. Imagine living with a person like me that's just always consumed. And that was another thing. When I realized, when I went through the step work, I started seeing how, like, when I am hurt or threatened, one of the ways that I generally don't, when I'm not in God's will, when I'm hurt or threatened like that, is because I'm so consumed with me that I'm all I think about, and I'm so inconsiderate about anybody else, right? I'm not considering the other person and what they're going through at all.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think that's what God's will is for me. I like that line. My favorite line in the big book says, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend on our constant thought of others and how we may meet their needs, right?
That's my favorite line in the whole book.
Same
Literally.
here. That's literally like the 12 steps in a nutshell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, so, and I'll tell you this, to take it a step further, like, just because I'm free between the third and the fourth column, when I'm freed up because I've done the prayer work and I'm looking at it from an entirely different angle, that doesn't necessarily mean when, like, for example, if it's somebody at work that I'm around a lot, right, on a regular basis, right, I'm not always going to be, I don't like some of the things that these people still do. I'm not harboring a resentment, but I'm still not going to like some of the things that's taking place, right? If people have certain attitudes, they're not nice people or whatever, right? And so where the prayer work really helps, and I got this from Dave F. He was on the show, and I recently did like a little bit of, like, he kind of walked me through like how he does certain stuff. I like to go into he calls it the forgiveness prayer, and a lot of people call it the sick man prayer, but I like to be specific, like, dear God, whenever so-and-so is disrespectful, I'm not going to mention any names on here, but when he's disrespectful, help me treat him, help me be tolerant and patient with this guy. Help me treat him like the child of God that he is. Help me, and go like immediately into it, because I think there's a lot of people have this idea of like, oh, you get prayed up and you're no longer resentful. Well, that's true, but that don't mean it's not going to come back. I mean, not come back. Right. But I mean, when you're around people, I got to get prayed up to get into the power, and to start seeing these people like the children of God that they are, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I really like how you touched on that. I was hoping you was going to touch on that. I love how you talk about that in the fourth step. Yeah. What about Go ahead.
Well, no, I love it too, man, and I'll tell you I love what we were talking about, both like the character defects coming out, like when. Well, what we said, but it's funny. Our 2-year-old, we got a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, 2-year-old, now a newborn, but the 2-year-old, my older kids, they're all nice. I'm not just saying that because of mine. They're good-hearted, sweet kids, but they both like the same toy. They all like the same toy sometimes. And my younger, the 2-year-old, is really just kind of, there's nothing he can do to a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And so if somebody takes his toy, or if he, whatever, gets upset, he starts screaming, and, he'll give it, and then cry. And he just hauls off and hits them. They're twice his size, and he just hits them. And it's like, that's and I'm not trying to be poetic, but that's like me. Like, when I'm not getting my way, like, I'll kind of make a fuss about it, but like, after that, I'm coming after you, like, metaphorically. Yeah. And like, all he has to do, we tell him every time he hits him, we're like, just call for help. We'll come and make it right. And it just kind of, I forget to call for help. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I swear to God. Yeah. And one of the things I just wanted to touch on, because this is real important, a lot of times I didn't want I don't want somebody to hear what I said and be upset or feel overlooked. But, when I was talking about the 4 step, column 4, a lot of times in the 4 step, I find I either did something in column 4 to make the person I resent do what they did in column 2, or the person in column 1 did what they did in column 2 and it pissed me off and I retaliated in 4. So either I started it or I finished it inappropriately. But the one thing is, there are things that, happen to people that are out of their control. Somebody murders your family member. Somebody, bad things happen. Somebody does something horrible to you when you're a kid. A nursing home mistreats your grandma. What is the things that I'm not really involved in. And one of the things I think I shared about that night at the meeting, and I won't go into a whole big deal, but I there's nothing I can take to God where He encourages me to hang on to hate in my heart. There's nothing so horrible where I take it and say, listen to this, and He goes, hang on to that forever. You know what I'm saying? Like, just whatever you do, stay as angry about that as humanly possible for as long as humanly possible. Never. There's nothing. The most heinous thing anyone can think of. The God I pray to doesn't say, man, keep that right there in your shirt, in your watch pocket. Yeah. It's always let it go. So anyway, because you know how it is in the rooms. Horrible. You get it. So, but anyway,
I love
that. What we? Go ahead.
I love how you said that. Because that's a common question with certain guys when you're going through the work, and have you ever heard Sandy B talk about whenever when he found out the moment he found out his daughter had got murdered?
Yes.
And he said, I went immediately to God right then and just let Him know this isn't going to come between our relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, man, that's powerful, right? And
yeah,
it's funny. It's crazy how so that's the reason I love they use that word harboring in the book. It's like people are going to do stuff. I'm not always supposed to like everything. You get what I mean? But if I'm harboring a resentment, it's a completely different situation, right?
Right.
Way different. And I love how you said that. There's never a time where where He's going to tell you, oh yeah, you should hang on to that. That's powerful. That's good. I like that. Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, man. I heard that somewhere. I wish I could remember where I heard it, but.
That's good stuff. It's so true.
Yeah. The harbor. We don't have to keep, but Sam said, he goes, think of harboring a fugitive. You come in like, no one knows you're here. You had enough to eat. Here's some bath towels. I got to go to work today. Yeah. Someone knocks on the door like, is that fugitive? No, haven't seen him. Just me here alone. Keeping it safe, taking good care of it, and just chilling.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. I love that.
That's so funny. Yeah. So what you want to? It's really your call. We can go into 5. You want to go into 5 right now, and then wrap it up, or do you want to wrap it up right now? Let's do 5.
It really, whatever you want to do. There was some quick things on fear I wanted to touch. We can.
Oh no,
yank
let's
it right
do that.
now.
No, let's do fear. No, absolutely.
This is quick, 2 or 3 minutes, and then hey, dude, I've got all night, so I can go as long as you want.
Me too.
But if you want to, like for the audience, people are listening, don't have hours now. I understand, it doesn't matter to me, but the fears, it's we listed all of our fears, and I tried to get the deep ones, like fear of what other people think, fear of losing a loved one, fear of dying alone, fear of getting an illness, fear of relapse, fear that no one really likes me, like fear that, I'm not attractive, fear that, people don't think I'm cool, just the whole night, I don't know, all this deep stuff. And it goes through and it says, we asked ourselves why we had these fears. And a lot of people answer that, like, why do I have a fear of getting cancer? Well, I'm a smoker, or, whatever. Well, in this particular, this 4-step, I've done it, both ways, but in the 1 4-step, I didn't do that. And the reason was because, and I do think people should look at that. I look at that. Bob Darrell talks about one of my, big heroes, it's, but the point is, there's no question mark, after that. And I mean, some could argue it's a statement. We asked ourselves, but the very next line does have a question mark. It says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And my sponsor, he had me go through all my fears, fear of what other people think. He goes, Aaron, is it fair to say that ultimately if you do everything you can do to alter what other people think, it's still out of your control. You can put on polo and get a fresh haircut and try to make money and have a cool car. He goes, does that fully solve the fear problem? Are you just utterly self-assured 24 hours a day if you have a nice car? And I said, well, no. He goes, okay, so you have this fear because self-reliance failure. I said, yeah. He goes, and I have a fear of flying. He goes, is it safe to say that you can pick the best airline and you can try to interview the pilot and does it fully solve the fear problem? I said, no, an engine can still go out midair. He goes, okay, so it's out of your control. And he made me go through all my fears, and he goes, the root of all your fears is that no matter how much self-reliance or dedication, no matter what, the outcome is ultimately out of your control. If you're fear of being broke, you can save money all you want. That helps. Don't get me wrong. It helps. Does it fully solve the fear of, being broke? No, it does not. And he goes, so the second question is, if you had full reliance on God, I'm not sure anybody on this planet does. I'm not trying to be blasphemous, but I'm not even sure the highest religious ranking officials like have full, like 100% unwavering. But he goes, if you had full reliance on God, like you knew he knew what was best. You knew he had all his calls, on hold. He was just looking at your situation. He was going to take. If you had that, would you have any of these fears? Would you fear getting on an airplane if God was riding in the seat right next to you with his hand on your lap saying, it's going to be cool, homie? He goes, if that was happening, would you have that fear? I said, well, that doesn't happen. He goes, that's not what I asked you. If that happened, would you have that fear? I said, hell no. I'd be cool. He goes, so you need to release your idea that self, like quit buying the polo and quit wearing and quit. He goes, you need to be focusing all your time and energy and attention on getting closer to God and trusting him. I said, oh, okay. And he had me pray the prayers for every single prayer, every single fear individually. And a really cool story. One of my biggest fears was losing my father. Both my parents, but my father, was one of them. And I said, God, remove my fear of losing my father and direct my attention to what you'd have me be. And he had me write down the answer. And the answer was, roughly, to be a good son, to be someone he could be proud of, to let my dad know that I loved him, how grateful, appreciative I was, spend as much time with him as possible, just all that. And I started doing those things, and my dad ended up dying of a sudden heart attack in 2018, and I miss him terribly. I would do anything in my power to have him back here with me. He was my best friend. I don't say that to honor his memory. I say that because I spent 8 out of 10 years in institutions and fell out of my third sophomore year in high school to go to penitentiary. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have anybody yet. He was my guy, like my best friend. Yeah. But I can honestly say that I'm at peace at everything that happened in our relationship, because I did that, the stuff that I felt God kind of called me to do while he was still here. That worked I always care what other people think about me, and I try to look cool or be cool. And he goes, how about you just be nice to people? I started trying to be nice to people. And Scott says this, but I'm going to steal it. My biggest problem today literally is I don't have enough time to keep up with all the people that want to be a part of my life. Like, it's the God's honest truth.
Sure.
Everything that I try to, live as God would have me, the fear goes away just to the extent that I do that. And the only reason I wanted to hit that is because fear was my earliest memories. People, you go to rehab or a doctor and like, what did you enjoy when you were a kid? Or what's your earliest memory? It was just anxiety. It was just fear. It was just worrying. It was just stressing out and being afraid to even tell people I was afraid. And it was just fear just ruled me. And so it was such a groundbreaking, exercise or whatever you want to call it, progression, to work the that part of the inventory. So
no, that's good
anyway.
Stuff. No, it's great. So, and also thank you for because I completely, the fear and the sex for some reason just completely slipped my mind. I thought you were needing to wrap it up. I love that, man. It's good stuff. I tell you what one thing that so by the time when I first got sober, I'd say probably about 90 days in, I got real deep into like transcendental meditation, right? And I didn't do much step work in the book, to be honest with you, back then. We would hit bits and pieces, but it took several years before I had a solid experience of the big book. but I did do a lot of other stuff, right? And I'm not suggesting that to any listeners, but one of them was I used to, I still to this day meditate quite a bit, but transcendental meditation. And I tell you, like, if you look what in the We Agnostics, it says we found that there was something a part of our makeup, right? The fundamental, we're down in each man, woman, and child was the fundamental idea of God, right? And it said we found it was a part of our makeup, right? Faith in some kind of power was a part of our makeup. And I love, like, going back to, like, when we were talking about self and all the different ways it shows up, right? Self-reliance is what you were just talking about. And Charlie, going back to what Charlie P. used to always talk about when he'd say the self-piece, and it was huge because if you look at, like, what would God have me be, and a lot of times it's like, okay, what takes me out of that was my thinking mind, right? I don't know if you're familiar with, like, I got this chit chat up there just talking crap to me all day, consuming me with all kinds of stuff, right? And like when I can get out of that and rest in my heart, it's like, okay, there's no problems there. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, and I just do the right thing, So I love how, like, realizing, because I like how they use the word makeup in the second step when they said, the fundamental idea of God, and they also say we searched out the flaws in our makeup, which caused our failures, right? And they said, being convinced that self manifested in its various ways is what defeated us, we considered the common ways that it manifests, right? And then I love how, like, they use, so in the big book we'll use the three, resentment was the number one offender, and then we do the fear inventory. It's just another way self shows up, right? I mean, like, it's when I'm relying on that little, chit chat up there that's trying to talk to me or trying, it's just, there's no way it's going to be able to, it wants to convince me this, or does that make sense? It wants to convince me this or convince me that. And if I'm relying on my, a mental commentary up there, it's going to be a shit show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's always that, if you look at any of the fears of, when I list my fears, what's going on, it's always some kind of, like, got some kind of mental commentary. Oh, this shouldn't be like this. Oh, that shouldn't be like this. Oh, they're probably like this. Oh, this is probably this. Oh, this, just constantly chit-chatting. So I really like touching on that whenever I'm talking about the fears. And it's just self. It's just how self shows up, right? And I also like going into, when we were talking about hurt or threatened, those are different areas of self, right? So when I'm relying on, like, don't get me wrong, I think self-esteem and all these, ambitions and all these things, pocketbook, I don't think there's anything wrong with any of that stuff, right? I think they're all God-given instincts. The problem is when they're blindly driving me, I get out of God's will, right? And that's my experience, so it's like, self-esteem, nothing wrong with self-esteem, but when I got too much, or it's a false sense of self-esteem, where I'm, I'm so prideful that it's causing an issue in my life, and that's where the problem is for me, and it's all basic, like, okay, yeah, I'm not relying on the power of the universe, and I'm relying on, my BS, right?
Oh yeah.
yeah. So
It's such a...
Let's go into the sex ideals, and what's your experience with any of that?
Well, yeah, it's we always did a 5-column inventory. I heard, a few years ago, Don Pritz, or some people say answer the 9 questions, and that's basically what we did, but in a 5-column way. And but I love, Don Pritz. He goes, my sexual inventory could have fit on a 3x5 note card, and it wasn't like, it's, I mean, because it's all the same, it's the exact same, but we did, whom had we hurt, and I remember my sponsor goes, that's not just people you dated. Like, if you did some girl, ruined her, upset her, how do you think her parents felt about that? Her coming home crying, and like, whom had we hurt? And then, said, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, bitterness? And we went through all that. Let's see. Well, there's 3 other questions in there. Did we where we've been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate. We answered those, but the most important thing was, or not the most important, but he goes, where were we at fault, and then what should we have done instead? And those were usually, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details, just out of respect for a lot of things, but the point is, I remember where it talks about, God, can alone judge our sex situation. They go into the whole thing. Some people say none of it. Some people say, the more, all you can get. But we take each situation to God. And in just a small example, I remember asked my sponsor, I was in a halfway house and I was wild, and I'd been incarcerated a lot, and I was like, what about just like casual stuff? I was like, what if, no one's feelings are involved? Everyone knows what it is on the front end. Like, what about casual? Let's just, use your imagination, dating, hookups, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And he goes, I don't know. He goes, ask God what he thinks about that. And I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, say, hey, God, there's this, person over there I'm interested. And this goes for anyone. I'm not even talking about me. Yeah. He goes, somebody over there that, I feel like I could have a good time with, for a night or a week or a half hour or whatever the hell it is. He goes, see how God feels about that. He goes, see if a big, fist comes out of the clouds to bump you, like go for it. You know what I mean? He goes, ask, God, if this is your daughter, you know what I mean? And I really have no interest in being with her. I don't really necessarily respect her as a person. And don't judge me. I'm just trying to paint a broad stroke. He goes, what do you think about, me doing this? He goes, some people might get the green light. He goes, but I'm not sure if you will or not. And I remember like really sitting there, because all I really used sex for, was personal validation. Like it wasn't the physical thing. It was just kind of like I felt so horrible about myself that it's kind of like, it was just something that to make me feel better temporarily at the expense of other people. Yeah. And it's in early if you and me went to my hometown right now today, and you and me were walking through the mall, and I grabbed you all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, Paul, let's go in Aeropostale. Hey, let's get here. You could tell I was ducking somebody. It's not a big dude that wants to whoop me. It's not somebody I owe money to. It's going to trace back to some sexual exploit. You know what I'm saying? Like it caused so much damage. If somebody's at the meeting not getting invited to sushi, it's probably sex. I mean, you understand what I'm getting at? Like they're usually, they did something in the meeting they shouldn't have. It caused a lot of problems, that on the, on a zoom out perspective looked unrelated, but the selfish sex conduct really just, it can cause as many problems as just about anything else we can do. So true. But on the very last thing, writing the sexual ideal, a lot of people do this differently too. This is my sponsor goes, he goes, if you gave God full control over your sex life, like absolute full control, he goes, write down what you think that would look like. He goes, some people their sexual ideal is to wear protection from now on. He goes, other people's sexual ideal is never to have intercourse again until they're married. He goes, I'm not telling you what yours should be, but things like, don't cheat when you're in a relationship, or maybe don't get with somebody if they're in a relationship. And a good one for me was, don't do anything I wouldn't be comfortable with my wife doing, or don't do anything I would not do if my wife was standing right next to me. You know what I'm saying? Just like, honor, being faithful, all this and that. And it leads to a real intimate relationship rather than a physical conquest, so, but anyway, that's kind of the, you know what I'm saying? The sort of audit the course version on that one.
Yeah, I like how you said that. I like how Don P, which something you just said, just touched on me on something that he would say. He said that, we're not to be the arbiter of anybody's sex conduct, and not even our own, right? And,
yeah.
And he was like, and it's just exactly what you was just saying. He's like, we're going to let God do all that, right? And he was like, at the end, so that's the purpose of the inventory and conversating with God, like what you're saying, right? Would God come out and give me a fist bump, right? I mean, at the end of the day, he was like, there's not a lot of nuns or a lot of prostitutes in AA, something along the lines of like that. I haven't seen God make a whole lot of either one of those, right? And in AA is what he's saying. And so that's so big, man. It's like, and that's the purpose of the inventory for me, is like, you go through this piece of inventory and ask all these questions. Was I inconsiderate, unjustifiably aroused jealousy, suspicion, bitterness, Elspeth. Well, like, after you get finished and filling out just, a couple of them, you have this pretty good understanding on it's like I always tell people, it's like, maybe I don't know exactly what God's will is for me today, but I got a pretty good understanding on what it's not. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So it's like, what's the opposite of everything you just did? Everything you just talked about. And I tell you, the ideals list was a game changer. Like, it's something that happened. I just had that. Had this as a tool over the last couple of years. John, my current sponsor, he asked me one day. It was like, what's your ideals? Let's talk about your sex ideals. And I'd never even heard this before, right? And I was, like 5 years sober or something. And but it's a game changer because it gives me something that I'm aiming towards, and also I take it a step further. I have ideals on, like, what it looks like in every different relationships. What's my ideal relationship look like with a sponsee? What's it look like with a coworker or my boss or sponsor? What's my ideal relationship look like with my sponsor? Or how about, my ideal relationship look like with, I even take it a step further, like, my dogs. I always talk about that when I'm in meetings, like, but there was a time in my life where, like, I got 2 dogs at home to where it's like, I was gone most nights and I work full time, so, like, there would be nights where, like, my dogs are here by themselves, for, 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and it was like, man, that's no good, so I take that as ideals like a step further, and I take them in different areas of my life. But you're right, everyone does do it a little different. I like what, the cool part about the podcast, man, is I get to talk to all kinds of different people in recovery, right? And every one of them have their own take, and every one of them are right. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They get to have their own experience, and, especially, like, depending on, everyone's going to have their own experience, and it doesn't make anyone, more right than the other, or less right than the other. They get to have their own experience, and they get to have exactly where they're at. And I love that about this because, it's so easy, especially when you listen to, I grew up, pretty much grew up in recovery, listening to speaker tapes and stuff. And I get to talk to a lot of cool people and people that I've listened to for years. And, I can have like 2 or 3 people on the show, and I look up to every one of them, whether, people say you're supposed to or not, there's still a side of me that looks up to most of these people, right? And it's funny because they can completely contradict each other, and they're all right, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the cool part about it. Everyone has their own experience, and it's cool, yeah. So let's go ahead and touch on fire real quick. Or actually, let's do this. Let's stop right there. And then we'll go into 5 because we were an hour and a half in right now. So we'll start with 5 next week.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, brother. I think that's a good idea. So, we don't want to rush it or drain anybody.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and the cool part about the podcast is that they can always, like, they don't have to listen to this all at once, they can.
Oh, and that's true. That is true. That's true. So I'm
cool,
used to having them hostage in a meeting,
That's so true. I get it.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've enjoyed this, man. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for everything you shared, man. Thanks for having me. I look forward to next week.
Yeah, I appreciate you, buddy. And I will talk to you next week, man. And for the listeners, just to let everybody know, the listeners, this Tuesday, Judy L. from Colorado is going to be on the show. And Judy's a real cool lady. Don Pritz actually sponsored her for years. And she was telling me a story that one of the last times I talked to her about the night before he passed away, just the conversation they were having on his, she was sitting there having a conversation with him. It's powerful, just some powerful stuff. Getting to talk to all these people that knew, Pritz was a special guy for me, right? I've got the honor to meet and talk to a lot of people. I got a lot of people scheduled on the show that was involved. He had a big part of their life to do with, I'm cool. I like getting these people on the show to just see what their experience was like with him and some of the stories, and also, that's kind of what started the podcast, or not podcast, but the YouTube channel was when I finally found the big book. I'd found all the things that a lot of these people that were talking about the book had in common was the one major thing was that they all come from the Pritz lineage, right? And that's what kind of started the show, the podcast. So it was cool. The page started getting all kinds of attention and stuff. So, but yeah, so Judy L is going to be it's this Tuesday, and I'm super excited about that. And I will talk to you next week, Aaron. Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, brother. I'll talk to you then.
Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.